Hello and welcome to Arise News. You're watching the Global Business Report. I'm Rosi Sodiri coming to you from Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos. We begin, of course, this morning with President Bola Tinubu's second state broadcast since becoming president in May. It comes after his decision to end fuel subsidies, which led, of course, to soaring food and petrol prices. In his nationwide address, which came at the end of July, President Tinubu again justified the removal of the subsidy, saying Nigeria has saved about ₦1 trillion in the 2 months since its removal. He acknowledged the rise in the cost of living and announced a few programs and palliatives that he says will help Nigerians across socio-economic brackets. Here's an excerpt from that speech.
For several years, I have consistently maintained the position that the fuel subsidy had to go. This once beneficial measure had outlived its usefulness. The subsidy cost us trillions of naira yearly. Such as a vast sum of money would have been better spent on public transportation, health care, school, housing, and even national security to strengthen the manufacturing sector, increase its capacity to expand and create good-paying jobs. We are going to spend 75 billion between July 2023 and March 2024. Our administration recognizes the importance of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises and the informal sector as the drivers of growth. We are going to energize this important sector with 125 billion. Out of the sum, we will spend 50 billion conditional grant to 1 million nano businesses between now and March 24. Our target is to give a minimum of 50,000 each to 1,300 nano businesses owners in each of the 774 local governments across the country. Ultimately, this program will further drive financial inclusion by onboarding beneficiaries into the formal banking system. In like manner, we will fund 100,000 MSMEs and startups with 75 billion. I have ordered release of 200,000 metric tons of grains from strategic reserves to households across the 36 states and FCT to moderate prices. We are also providing 225,000 metric tons of fertilizer, seeding, and other inputs to farmers who are committed to our food security agenda. Our plan to support cultivation of 500,000 hectares of farmland and all year-round farming practice remain on course. To be specific, 200 billion out of the 500 billion approved by the National Assembly will be disbursed as follows. Our administration will invest 50 billion each to cultivate 150,000 hectares of rice and maize. 50 billion each will also be earmarked to cultivate 100,000 hectares of wheat and cassava. Part of our program is to roll out buses across state and local government for mass transit at a much more affordable rate. We have made provision to invest 100 billion between now and March 2024 to acquire minimum of 3,000 units of 20-seater CNG fuel buses. In the same vein, we are also working in a collaboration with the labor unions to introduce a new national minimum wage for workers. I want to tell you, our workers, that your salary review is coming.
All right, your salary review is coming. All right. Joining us to discuss further, we have Arise Business Analyst Chika Mbonu. We also have Amaka Nwaokolo, who is the head of the Faith Institute, and Bambo Adebowale. He's the director and dean at the Faith School. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much for joining us. So the president has started his speech justifying the removal of fuel subsidies. I would like for each of you to speak to the impact it's had on businesses. Amaka, starting with you.
You know, it's interesting. I thought that the speech was a great one, particularly because it looked at providing interventions for small and growing businesses, which are in dire need of that. But specifically to answer your question, with regards to how the fuel subsidy removal has impacted businesses, I would definitely say inflation and then the rising cost of just doing business, which automatically means that prices, cost of products that businesses are putting out is more expensive, and which in turn also means that there's low patronage, and then you have low liquidity, low cash flow, also impacting on their revenue and profit status. So in a nutshell, these are some of the areas that a lot of small businesses are complaining, at least for now. Hopefully, with the interventions that have been described being implemented, we can see things moderate a bit and stabilize a bit and things pick up. But for now, these are some of the feedback that we're getting.
All right, Chika, you're a businessman. You've traveled the country. What's been the impact?
You can look at it at several levels. For the individuals that have motor vehicles, clearly these days, if you enter the filling station, and I was watching a skit the other day, somebody went in and bought full tank, and they started celebrating the person. So immediately, the cost of driving your cars is already more than doubled for a lot of people. And of course, you know the pass-through effect of that into inflation, as Amaka has said. Now, the other aspect of this is that, remember that power is a major issue in our country. And the micro, the nano, the SMEs that the president is talking about, a lot of them depend on the smaller generators that use petrol, to power their businesses. And so this has a direct impact again on their businesses, because the cost of petrol to power those generators has actually has gone up to the roof. And so again, everything, not rocket science, everything just passes through to cost of doing business and then inflation. If you're not a SME, you patronize SMEs, so there's a transferred cost on you. If you don't have vehicles and stuff like that, that you patronize people who do that transfer cost on you. And a lot of businesses depend on the e-businesses now depend on motorcycles and dispatch riders, and the cost of moving those business things around now also gone up because those things use petrol. So in the basket, it's just direct impact is the cost of doing business has gone up, in the economy.
Bambo, your take on the impact that we've seen.
Well, generally, like Amaka and Chika have both said, there's always going to be the immediate pressure. What we're also experiencing, or what I have started to experience, is that there are a lot of individuals and a lot of organizations who are now doing a bit of belt tightening. A lot of individuals who would normally not think twice before they engage in a transaction, before they think about the calculation of their business, the pricing, and how much they're going to put these things out into the market, and now finding themselves looking at what is real, what is sustainable, so that it's not just an issue of liquidity, it's also an issue of sustainability. So on the one hand, you have individuals who are facing a lot of barrage from different perspectives. The increase in fuel as a result of the removal of the subsidy is just one. Because you now have to deal with issues of power constraints, like Chika mentioned, you're now having to be more determined and more deliberate in those decisions that you are making, to the extent that it is not just how much am I charging, it's how much can the market also bear. Because if I'm charging my items on the basis of this is what it costs me to push it out, one also needs to be cognizant of the fact that the person buying it is also facing more or less, if not more challenges than you, the individual. And what we are finding now is that a lot of the organizations are finding themselves in an area where they are needing to think more than what they were doing before. So it's not just thinking outside the box. It's probably throwing away the box. and taking a step back and rethinking before redeploying.
Thank you for that. All right, next up is the exchange rates. The president saying that that has benefited elites and there was a lot of corruption in there. So the fuel subsidy impact, Amaka, starting with you again, exchange rate impacts as far as the businesses that you speak to, cover, and so on and so forth.
I think that the impact is very similar. When you compare it with the impact that the fuel subsidy removal has also had. But I think that the introduction of the harmonization of all foreign exchange windows was very critical to try to just stabilize the economy and stabilize the way we do businesses conduct business. What is happening now is that we're still seeing a lot of fluctuations, in the market. So it's still difficult for a lot of businesses, particularly businesses that have to maybe buy input materials from outside of the country, and all of that. So it definitely impacts on the cost at which they put their products or their services out there for purchase, which again, back to the fuel subsidy issue, also makes it just difficult for people to purchase the services at the prices that they are able to put them forward, and automatically again impacts on their bottom line. So I think that what would be great to see is that things moderate over the next couple of months, hopefully, and maybe by the end of the year, and then things stabilize a bit, and so we can see an uptake or stabilization for a lot of businesses. But right now, it's still the fluctuations, the pressure is still there, and so a lot of businesses are still struggling. But hopefully, in the next couple of months, things even out a bit, and then we can see things stabilize for small businesses.
All right. Chika, this is your department, exchange rates.
Yeah, but even before I take on the exchange rate, let me put it out there that the fundamentals about removal of fuel subsidy, I'm sure this panel here totally agrees with that. I agree with that. That even for me, I don't know how to say it, whether people classify me as being, being mean or whatever.
Oh, okay.
The main fact that Reuters and such have reported that refineries abroad are now crying because of the reduction in the import from Nigeria. The main fact that we'll see lined up in the borders between us and Cameroon and other countries, hundreds and millions of empty jerry cans for businesses that are no longer thriving because of that. Give me some joy that that wasn't this right. Consumption of about 60 million liters. So on this program, thought about it several times and said, did the number of cars suddenly increase?
Right.
And so like that. So that is that. So support that. Foreign exchange also, I think we'll support that. I guess maybe down the line, you're going to ask us question and say, how could this be handled better? Yeah. We support that. So the president's intro in line, under these topics is what we identify with. This had to go. This things had to go. And but we need to just focus the economy and get it right. Yeah. So it's a pass-through effect. This country literally imports everything. It literally imports everything. At the time, even I saw when I entered the supermarket, I saw packaged egusi soup. That came in from, I think, Malaysia or something like that. Palm oil comes in from abroad. So many things, toothpicks, even a lot of things we can produce here, come from us. So we literally import everything. So it's not surprising, therefore, that once you move all the prices of the FX exchange rate moves up, immediately, everything moves up also. I've said it on this program, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, I said, see guys, as far as that we are importing, almost depending 100% on the production of fuel, the PMS that we use in this country, once exchange rate moves up, to pass through again to the price of, at the pump price. Yeah. It's not magic, it's not rocket science. That's what the reality, that's what we face. Yeah. I'm sure that's what the president is talking about, that he had no choice, and this is what has to do. So, exchange rate goes up, we're import dependent country,
So it's a pass.
It has to go up. It has to go up.
Thanks for that, Chika. Bambo, your thoughts, your exchange rate?
It was bound to happen. We knew it was coming. I think it's more of how should we have put it in place. But I think there was going to always be a time where we'd had to do it one way or the other. What I would like to see now is how we react to it. As Chika has said, we are almost a totally dependent country on foreign imports, to the extent that it is almost immediate when these things change that you see the impact and the implications. Even the fuel to power your generators, when there's a challenge, is not being produced here. A lot of it is being imported. Having said that, what we will now probably find ourselves in is the realization that those opportunities that we either ignored or didn't maximize will now start to come back into fore. We are now in a position where we can start to know the true value of our Naira, realistically. You know, when we had different windows, it was difficult to say, you know, X was the value of the dollar. If you're an airline, it was different from if you were paying for your school fees, it's different if you're a manufacturer. But now there's a semblance of convergence. What you are going to now start to look for, or what I would like to see the government do, is to look for those opportunities where our earnings in foreign exchange will increase, not just in the area of, you know, fossil fuels, but in the other areas. And the MSMEs are well positioned to start to do that. We've already got structures in place. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is in place. The other day, Algeria was saying that they wanted to join BRICS. It speaks to something, that they appreciate that a lot of these countries, especially those in sub-Saharan Africa, are dependent on foreign exchange to the tune that if we do not start to address it and maximize on it, we are always going to struggle. What I hope and what I have seen in some areas are organizations who are looking at what they do, either a good or a service, that can generate foreign income, because they need and we need foreign income. The other thing is that as liquidity increases, I would expect the rates to start to become a more realistic one, because we've got a bit of uncertainty. And we do definitely know that demand is outstripping supply, right. And that's part of the reason why the value is so abnormally high. But I don't think it's going to get to a stage where it's going to crash. I think we're just going to have a bit of stability. But what I would hope that organizations, individuals, MSMEs do is to start looking at those expenses that are important, that are crucial for them to operate, but are the ones that can also start to attract foreign income at the same time that we are becoming more frugal in how we are spending things. Because don't forget that a large percentage of middle-class Nigeria are still in need of foreign income for their school fees, for medical tourism, even to buy their cars. It was interesting when the president was talking about, you know, intervention for the auto industry. But don't forget that apart from maybe one organization that allegedly assembles or manufactures in Nigeria, nearly every vehicle on the road, 12 million of them, are imported.
Gotcha.
And that would be the same for the parts. Thank you.
Excellent. I want to get to some of the highlights of the speech, particularly minimum wage. So the president has said that there will be an upward review. Don't mean to put you three on the spot, but what is an acceptable minimum wage in Nigeria? Amaka, unfortunately, you have to go first. How much should we pay? What's acceptable? Within the realities of the cost structure for government, what do you think?
Right. So I think that when we consider what the minimum wage was and what the inflation rate at the time was and what the inflation rate is now, ideally, we should be looking at, say, a 70% to 80% increase. But the question, though, would be, even if the government can afford that, right? Can businesses, for example, afford to do that, to pay their staff that amount of money? So I think this is where the stimulus package, you know, and all of that the government has, that the president has talked about, will really come in handy. So if you ask me, I would say ideally 70 to 80%, considering the inflation rate currently. So
that's 45, maybe to 50,000. I think. Chika, you're up next. You're an employer of labor.
I hope my employees are not watching this. I think Amaka has put it very well. She analyzed very well. I mean, you know, sometimes I shudder at how a lot of workers actually survive. But you see, you also look at and say the cash flow of the employees and say, what do they spend it on? And occasionally I ask them, and then a lot of them spend it on transport. And then you find somebody who's earning 30,000 Naira who spend about 20,000 Naira a month on transport. So, just as she said, can we have, you know, the bus transport system, you know, that enables people to move, you know, from their one place to another place and at affordable rates? Lagos State government, for example, the blue line and red line we've been hearing for a long time. We've been talking about it and say, speak to us about what is happening. The former president came and did some roadshow on it.
Yeah.
What's happening, when is it going to come up? Things like that will actually help, because a lot more money goes on transportation, and then of course on food. So I don't hold the gun on my head. But I think the minimum wage now is about 30,000 naira.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the minimum increase we should require is about 100%.
Okay. So Chika has jacked it up. He says 100%.
So minimum wage is should start about 60,000. And then the consequential adjustment going forward.
All right, Bambo, we've had you weigh in. What are you looking at?
Well, I have the
150%.
I have the advantage that both Amaka and Chika have put figures on the table.
Right.
So I'm going to put myself in the same basket.
Yeah.
What I think for me more importantly is to look at what the money is being expended on.
Right.
And why we are at that level. And let's not forget that minimum wage is really, to a large extent, the minimum wage for the civil servant.
Right.
Not for the private sector. And as Chika has said, if you think about it, once you set the minimum wage for the civil servants, then everybody in the organized private sector and even in the unorganized private sector are going to use that as a benchmark. Go back to when the Udoji review happened, and there was an upward review of salaries and then a backdating. What came with it was humongous amounts of inflation. The other thing that came with it was power, as in power shortages, because we all went out and we bought, my parents bought electronics. And there was a lot of, electronics that we didn't use before, and all of a sudden we had tripled the consumption of power without doubling the capacity of the grid. So I would say, as much as we would like to mention figures as, what we should increase the amount to, or what the amount should be, I think we should be more determined and more clear in how we arrive at that figure. What are we spending this money on? Or what would a typical civil servant at that level be spending money on? Transportation and food. So is there any way that the cost of transportation can be eased, made easier, subsidized, even removed if you are in the civil service? That takes care of transportation. If you're talking about food, and I remember going back to all the old platforms, Green Revolution, Operation Feed the Nation and the likes, there's still a lot of opportunity for individuals to engage in their own sustenance for food. I would also like to see that to support the people who are going to be earning this minimum wage, so that the minimum wage is not being used on the basics, transportation and feeding. Don't forget that there's also education and health. So is it possible that, for instance, the government will say from primary to maybe SS3, where you can read and write very comfortably, will be free? So that is one expense taken off taken out of the basket of wages.
Yeah.
If it's for food, I remember the good old days of the cooperatives. Certain specific food items were either subsidized or they were purchased bulk and then sold.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need checks and balances to make sure that those who buy it and those who need it are in alignment.
Yeah.
But one other thing that I also say about minimum wage is maybe it's also time for the government to take that bold move and start to rethink the Oronsaye report.
Aha, Chika has mentioned that several times on the show, yeah?
Because there's only so much that you can keep on increasing the wage of keep on increasing the wage of a civil service that you could probably get to be more effective, more proactive, more nimble, more reactive to things. To the extent that you would actually find that there's some countries who will say, not a problem, you want to increase in wage, I'll give it to you. In return, I would need these metrics, I would need these ratios, I would need these KPIs met, so that I will be given a budget. And I will say, I need to spend X, Y, Z to retain my staff. And you will then say, yes, I'll give it to you on the basis that these metrics, we are going to sit down and agree with them, and you're going to deliver on them. I think that way we won't have to face the challenge of, can we even sustain a minimum wage? So, your 60% or 70%, if we want, we can do 100%. What we need to back that with is that it's sustainable and that those who are collecting the money are delivering on the promises the same way that we are challenging the government to deliver it on its own promises. Thank you.
Well said. All right, we dig deeper now. The manufacturing stimulus. I want to take a look at this. I want to get your thoughts on each of you on this stimulus. 75 billion is what is going to be paid out and outlay from July of this year up until March next year. They're going to fund 75 enterprises in manufacturing. They're going to get 1 billion naira each at 9%. Maximum repayment of 60 months, which is what, about 5 years. Amaka, what do you think of this for the manufacturing
okay.
sector?
I seem to be on the hot seat today.
Yeah, going first.
So I think that this is exciting. However, I think the more important thing for me would be the implementation approach, right? As well as monitoring and evaluation around this. Because my concern with this is, with previous governments, I mean, this is not the first time where we hear programs are being introduced and, outlandish amounts of money being mentioned. And, it's spread all over the news, and all of that. And then issues begin to crop up with being able to access it. Can businesses actually access this fund? And then after a while, it just goes under the carpet. We don't hear about it anymore. So as exciting as it is, and I think that it's a great initiative coming up at this time, particularly, especially considering the potential that the manufacturing sector has, and the potential it also has to provide jobs. When we think of the unemployment rate in Nigeria, it's exciting. However, what I would like to see would be the implementation approach. What I would also like to see would be the monitoring and evaluation mechanism that's been set in place, and some of the projections, that the team that's behind implementing this already has in place. But having said that, I think it's a great and exciting initiative. It would also be interesting to see how, because I mean, they're going to receive this fund, and I think they're expected to pay back over 60 months, if correct. Then they get working capital for about 12 months. So if we're going to sort of invest in these businesses, it takes a bit of time to see traction. So the question will be, what are the additional support mechanisms apart from funding that would also be invested into the businesses to ensure that the funds that's being invested actually yields the results that we want to see. So.
All right, thank you very much. Chika, what do you make of this manufacturing stimulus?
There's an institution I don't want to mention their name, and
name them.
Someone I don't want to mention his name too on air. But this is similar to the program they have, which is 100 by 100. Okay. Where they regularly, I think every 100 days they will choose 100 companies that qualify support, and it's just the same sheet, the same implementation sheet. Yeah. I didn't see it different from that, and we're still waiting for the results from that initiative to pan out. So I don't think this is different from what I've initiated to do. See, the problem of manufacturing sector, of course, finance is important. But the people who qualify for this usually don't have problem with finance. Mm. They may have problem with cheaper finance, right? But a lot of them already have cheaper finance. I think the more holistic issue for our manufacturing sector is, the one problem they have is power. Yeah, power. And I would have thought the president would have spoken about power holistically, even the MSMEs, and thought about also the issues of overriding issue about manufacturing in Nigeria. The fact that our products are not competitive is also about power. And that should have been addressed, So talking about this is not new. This 75 billion or 75 companies and 9% is same thing that's the Central Bank of Nigeria. Sorry, I don't know if I mentioned them. Has been running. Yeah. That's what I have been running. Yeah. There's a program running like this for this. So that is that. But holistically, the issue of power is very important for the manufacturing sector. He don't address the multiplicity of taxes. He did some through the 4 executive orders that he did. Yeah. So there are low hanging fruits. The manufacturing sector, especially as my brother had mentioned about the African Continental Free Trade Area, we need to export to earn foreign exchange. Our manufacturing sector has to be turn outward to start exporting, seeing Africa as its market. Because a lot of things that we do here, we can actually put them out there. If you travel around, which I do, you find a lot of the things that they consume in those countries, they get it from Europe. We can produce all those things here. So my friend sector has to be made competitive. Funding them is one thing, but power is a major thing. I think on the bigger holistic level, the president should address the issue of, that's one thing I thought about, he should address the issue of power. What's the Siemens deals, for example, what's the plan? Where are we on that? Is it happening, not happening? The discount issue, the holistic thing about power is major for the manufacturing sector. But funding them is okay, but this program is already running, as I know,
Bambo, your thoughts? Okay, so the president did sign the Electricity Act, which allows the states to generate, but there's the issue of how long it would take to put together, right? But what were your thoughts on this manufacturing stimulus?
It's interesting, and I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic because I don't have any other place to go but to be in Nigeria and to support what is happening in my country. But think about it this way. We are one of the largest producers of waste per capita. That in itself is an industry. And there's a whole market outside Nigeria that wants the end product of waste. A lot of our cash products or cash crops are exported in their current form. So we export cocoa and import, the finished product. For those who are going to qualify for this loan, I would expect those companies that, one, are large employers of labor that can contribute to the GDP of the country, to the economy, that when they operate and they are operating efficiently and optimally, they can then take on the vendors, the people who are supplying services and goods to them, and start to pull all those ones up with themselves. So for every one organization that's collecting this loan, they're able to take with them in their growth trajectory another 5 or 6 or 10 other, smaller businesses to grow with them. I'd like those 75 organizations to be those who are already tax compliant. Because the last thing you want is for somebody who is not compliant, who doesn't have governance structures in place, to then benefit from your tax and my tax that we have paid from being compliant, and they are now the beneficiaries of it. As I was saying earlier on, we've got the free trade zone it's already in place. There's ECOWAS. Nigeria used to be, I think, is still a member of MINTS, the Mexico, India, Nigeria, Turkey alliance. I'd like to see us start to play in those markets. So those who are going to collect the loan, and 1 billion naira sounds a lot of money. It's not really that much money when you collect, when you convert it to the dollar with a weakish naira. You need to look for those businesses that can convert that money and convert it sustainably, and convert it in such a way that you can monitor what they've done with the money, and if there are gaps or if there are areas where they need support, it might be innovation, it might be tech, it might be talent retention or promotion, then there can be an additional support network thrown around them. So it's not just giving you money, you're getting a cheaper amount of finance, but your ability to deploy and to deploy it succinctly, and so to deploy it sustainably is then found wanting. Finally, I would like to see those businesses who benefit from it to be businesses that very quickly can start to accelerate their backward integration, not just from the source, but also to then start to empower those maybe clusters where it comes from. And as one other thing that I would have hoped could have happened, which might still happen, is to even have organizations that can clusterize to become big enough to get to benefit from that 1 billion. So rather than have 1 billion being given to Bambo PLC, we could have 10 smaller PLCs. If you aggregate them into one big organization, they can then benefit from that 1 billion, because you can then have organizations that are in different areas or different sectors that can come together and to make that up, almost like turn them into a kind of a maker space, where you've got them all. Your industrial areas might be one of those that the government could consider to give that, so that an industrial area of so many businesses have the finances, and together they're forming an ecosystem, they're forming a cluster, because issues like logistics, sharing talents, infrastructure would affect all of them. So they're either looking out for each other or they're whistleblowing on each other.
Right. Excellent stuff. All right, we're still here on the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Take a quick break and we'll continue with our panel reacting to the President's address to the nation on the economy. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. We're still, of course, talking about the reaction to the President Tinubu's address to the nation and his focus on the economy and the number of stimulus measures that have been mentioned. We still have, of course, Arise Business Analyst Chika Mbonu. We've got Amaka Nwaokolo, who is, of course, the head of the Faith Institute, and Bambo Adebowale, Director Dean at the Faith School. Access to finance, cheap financing. I want to get asked to the three of you, because this 9% rates, it's only for a select number of these firms. And we're trying to squeeze as many questions as we can into the final few minutes. But Amaka, starting with you, the importance of cheap finance to everyone else being able to access cheaper finance in Nigeria. Can you speak to the importance of that?
So I think that when we think of the access to finance problem, it's very multi-layered, right? And so being able to access finance from financial institutions, for example, at a single-digit rate, it's great. However, not everyone will qualify for that, right? So the question is, how do we rethink the MSME sector? If we're looking to fund and support nano, micro, small, and medium enterprises, we're looking at nano and micro particularly. They make up, 98% of the MSMEs, almost 41 million, or rather 39 million now in Nigeria. So they form the larger demographic of that number. And a lot of them cannot afford the requirements that financial institutions typically put forward. So even if you drop it to 8% or 7%, the question is that system is just not designed to support nano and micro businesses. Now, what we need to do is rethink that model to say, this is the group we're dealing with. This is the target demographic we're dealing with. These are the issues that they have. These are the peculiarities that, that are typically associated with this group. How do we design innovative funding products that can address the gaps that they have, whilst also taking into cognizance the issues and the risks associated with that demographic? And so, yes, again, just like what Chika said, this is not new. We've seen previous governments and previous programs rolled out with, with single digits, and all of that. My concern with it as well is, what is the access process like, right? So what does that look like? Would MSMEs actually be able to access the fund? So that's one. Two is, I strongly think that the entire process, the model needs to be rethinked, needs to be redesigned, so that nano businesses and micro businesses can actually access funding to start and grow and scale their businesses.
All right, thank you for that. Chika, you're a banker by trade, as well as many other hats you wear. This interest rate matter, you've talked about it several times. Is it that we have too many businesses, or there's not enough money?
The thing is that the existing risk management framework of the banks, as Amaka has said, doesn't support lending to these MSMEs. I mean, also, we expect the banks to protect the deposit funds, so don't expect them to give out the money to any kind of person anyhow.
Right. Yeah.
So we understand that. So there has to be a total rethink on how to provide funding. Because this sector, if you actually provide them the funding required, I believe that substantial part of our unemployment and productivity and GDP, will grow, and unemployment eliminated. So the major limiting factor is funding. How do we provide them funding in the structure that that will be acceptable to them? See, in this program, I don't have so much faith in the subnational governments.
Yeah.
Whenever you put something and say, oh yeah, we're going to hand it over to states and local governments to dispense, I just mark X failed, because if that's going to be the distribution channel, failed. It's going to we know how the journey, we know what happened in the last 8 years or some of these similar programs, how they were dispensed. So it's just going to fail. So we must find a way. There's Maiden, there's so many other agencies that have been set up for this, and they must cease to be civil servants or just there. We must think of holistically, sitting down with this MSMEs and finding out how do we lend to them and how to provide them funding required, because funding is a major thing. The existing risk management framework of the banks can do it, and this they get frustrated when market officers from banks come to them and say, we'll lend to you, and they send an application, and 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months are still there, and they never get any money. So, and they tell you the banks just come for their sales and not lend money to them. So it's a major issue, and the president has spoken so much on a high level, but the specifics are still very lacking on this issue.
Thanks, Chika. Bambo, you probably get the last word because it's amazing how time flies. But go ahead.
It is. So this is an interesting conundrum. Those in governance or those in governance have come up with an idea that's going to be deployed by those who are bankers and don't run businesses for people who do run businesses. There's a disconnect, is the starting point for this. Because like Chika said, many people who are in the banking sector, and I'm not just talking about the commercial, the orthodox, the former banks, banking generally, are individuals who are not entrepreneurs.
So you need a Chika, because Chika has been in banking and he runs a business. So that's the kind of people we should give.
So you now just need to go into politics then.
Exactly.
So you've got people in the bank who are going through the process. You need to fill this form and then this form, and then you need to bring A and B and C and D, and they're going through a process. And if you don't tick those boxes, you don't get the finance. Those in the banking sector themselves need to understand how businesses are run. Those in the business area need to be given easier ways to access the money. And if you remember when the currency was changed, or where there was an attempt to change the currency, a lot of people, when they couldn't get through to their normal banks, which I believe will be the same banks that are going to be dispersing this money, started going to the digital banks, the ones that you don't need, a whole list of various things to bring. And they found out that they were doing business sometimes even easier and quicker than before. The government in the comments last night, the president says that they were going to use these loans and the grants to bring the MSMEs in, bring them into inclusion bank. And I'm saying, well, which banking are we bringing them into? Because many of them have actually moved away from the banks for the reasons that both Amaka and Chika have given, that it's so difficult to access loans, that they found other ways. Some of them in desperation have gone to loan sharks. But if you actually look at how a loan shark deploys money, it's very much, almost 24 hours. So there must be something that they are doing that maybe the orthodox banks can learn from, obviously not the shark part of it, to the extent that I'm only borrowing 50 to 100 to 200,000 Naira. Why should it take me the same amount of time as somebody who's borrowing 10 to 15 to 20 million? And even the checks and balances are probably even more. If you think about the number of loans that have been given to large organizations who've then defaulted, you wonder, how did they get it? And this younger person or this small organization didn't get it. So 9 digits is fine. Give it to hundreds of thousands of MSMEs is also fine. It's whether they can get hold of it when they need it, in the format that they want it, and to also have guidance on how they're going to deploy it, so that you don't have people who are just using the money to stock up their shops without, maybe financial literacy or digital literacy to go with it. So I think even some of that could, I don't know whether you're monetizing or unmonetizing it, so that those who are collecting the money also have the same net of support, that when you collect the money, let's give you guidance, so that you don't go off and spend it on, all the things that are going to then put you back, probably even further back than where you were before.
Great stuff. Our thanks to Bambo Adebowale, Director, Dean at the Faith School, Amaka Nwaokolo, Head of the Faith Institute, and of course, our ever reliable Arise Business Analyst Chika Mbonu. Thank you three for this very in-depth, informative discussion on, of course, the President's economic address to the nation.